and we are here with another episode of Girlfriends Talk Marketing. Our guest today is all the way in Singapore, and we are super excited to have him on. Obviously, with everything that's going on right now in the world around the coronavirus, the topic that he's going to be discussing today, is something that businesses and consumers need to be aware of going forward. We're really excited to have him on to shed some light on the situation.
Great. This morning we're talking to Kyle Hegarty. He is the managing director for TSL Marketing. He helps companies basically expand overseas and adjust to different cultures. And he has a book coming out, which I'm really excited to get my hands on. It's called The Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet. So Kyle, can you tell me a little bit more about what you do and what this book is all about?
Sure. Well, thank you again for inviting me on to this show, especially given the strange circumstances that we're all in. So what I've been doing, as you had mentioned, I'm here in Singapore. I've been here for almost 14 or 15 years now. I came over and I set up TSL Asia, essentially, which is a marketing agency. So we do anything from lead generation, pipeline building. We focus on B2B companies, so basically helping them build their sales pipelines and progress those deals to close. In the US, the company does more on the digital marketing side. My background is more on the outbound calling and data building side. And so that's what I've been doing for the last decade and a half. Weirdly enough, this is not our first massive shock or downturn. So actually, part of the book talks about what happened after 08 and 09 and how we adjusted based on that. And for companies that are thinking about the next X amount of months, how do you start repositioning things in a downturn, right? So there's some questions there we can get into as well.
Yeah.
So that's a little encouraging, I think, because you're talking about gumming through it. So clearly there is an end to this.
There's always the light at the end of the tunnel. I think, in a marketing world and any world, you've got to be very careful that you don't just get caught up in the moment by moments noise and distractions. Certainly you need to kind of get through the daily stuff. But one of the things that I think that actually 08, 09 taught me personally was you've got to define what the day after looks like. So in other words, whenever this thing ends, well, I don't know, we don't know when it's going to end, but what do I want that day after to look like? And that then starts getting me to other questions, which is, well, what should I be doing now so that I'm in that situation that I want to be in? Again, from me, I'm a sales and marketing person. To me, it's about pipeline building. If you're talking about a business context, what small steps can I start taking now so that when that day one gets there, I'm sitting there prepped and ready to go.
Excellent. Yeah, kind of brings us to, one of our first questions, which is, how did you really come up with the idea for writing your book, and who needs this? Who did you gear the book towards?
Sure.
I feel like we all need it now, but.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if we've all just walked into the age of business nomads as we're all doing this remotely and trying to figure out all of these new systems. And, everybody's been talking about virtual teams and working remotely, and now it's for real. I've been doing this stuff for a long time, but it's still, this technology is not perfect. And I think that, no offense to any of the technology that's out there, it is just technology, and you can accelerate communication technology, but it actually, in many ways, decelerates human communication because you still have to do the communication part of it, right? So anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying that this book is really for anybody who finds that they're working virtually or remotely, especially across different parts of the world. The thing that hit me when I moved across the planet, so I'm from Boston originally. I think you're both based in Boston, right?
Yes.
Flew over from Boston, and I started setting up the business. I started hiring people. I started partnering with companies. I made a ton of mistakes. The communication styles were different. The working styles here were different. I wasn't just dealing with Singapore, I was dealing with really 7 to 10 different countries, which all have their own different language and culture and style. And so all of the stumbles, all the mistakes I was making, the longer I stuck around, I saw other people making the exact same mistakes. Like it was just almost like Groundhog Day. People making the wrong hires, people pissing one another off because their working styles were so different. Their communication styles were so different. Their social interactions were so different. How they communicated back to headquarters in a place like the United States or Western Europe was different. They wrestled with all of these things. There was one client that I had which he kind of epitomized the problem for me. It was my aha moment. It was this. It was a cloud company out of Texas that was expanding, and they wanted to very quickly go into Southeast Asia. And the guy running it, I don't know if he had a passport or not, but he certainly didn't care to travel much. He wasn't overly curious about different parts of the world. He just wanted to sell, which to a degree I understand. We all want to just move fast.
The market was hot. He had to get
the market was hot. I mean, his thing was, look, if somebody in Asia's growing, that's where I want to be. And so he sent me all of his marketing material, which was like, I don't know, it had like baseball imagery and it had all of these US American expressions and American spelling. And I kept pointing out piece by piece, like, this isn't going to work. People over here don't play baseball. They don't care. They don't understand these expressions. And the more and more I started talking to him, he got more frustrated. And finally, he just said, listen, just slap a dragon on it to make it Asian. And that'll be like our localization strategy. Still to this day, think about this phrase of like slap dragons, these companies and these people that basically don't make any effort to understand the local markets that they're trying to get into. They make sometimes stereotypical or even like racist assumptions, and they think that that's just going to work. And that's not just that's pointing fingers at American companies. They're guilty of it, but this happens all around the world. And Eastern companies out of this part of the world expanding are doing the exact same thing. So the original book was called Slapdragons, but I decided I had to change it just based on a couple of reasons. But that was kind of the starting point for me to say, enough people are making these mistakes, and rather than continue to watch this stuff just happening over and over again, let's capture it, let's tell the stories in a fun way, and hopefully give some guidance as to what can be done about it.
Well, I think this is an issue that every company faces, regardless of whether they're expanding overseas or not. They need to understand their audience and who they're really selling to, and they make a lot of mistakes with that. They're trying to talk to everybody and they're talking to nobody.
Yes.
So when a company is thinking about starting into a new area, what is your advice to them?
The first point that I try and always drive home is, and I think I like the way you asked that question. You didn't fall into the trap. Oftentimes companies say, well, we're going to go into the Asia market, or the Latin America market is hot. We're going there, or even America. But the first point that I always make is markets are different than regions. Okay. So Southeast Asia is not a market. Depends on how you define Southeast Asia. I think ASEAN I think there's 10 countries officially in ASEAN alone. And if you think about the geography of some of these, you've got Singapore and Malaysia next to Thailand, which is next to Vietnam. And all 4 of those are wildly different places, different economies, different cultures, languages, government styles. All of these factors are completely different. So for companies that say, oh, well, here's our Asia strategy, that to me is actually a prompt for me to say, okay, I think this could be a problem right off the bat if you're mixing up markets and regions. So the first point is just try and understand that difference, because it's a really important one.
And it's such a great point that you bring up, because you can't generalize all of the different cultures together, especially if you're going to be creating targeted messaging and really trying to make a connection with those folks, which that's what we talk, we've been talking about that a lot is just the need for authenticity with your brand. And, to your point, it's like if you're just going in there with a general strategy, it's not going to resonate as well, and you won't get the results that you're really looking for. Yeah. So with that said, what do you see as the biggest challenge with these companies? Kind of parlaying is when you kind of hear that, and when you kind of say to them, hey, like, let's talk about this a little bit. It's not just an Asia strategy. It's got to be, region specific and market specific. How are they responding to that? And then how are they overcoming that challenge?
That is the biggest challenge, which is one, to understand the complexity of all of these different local players. But two, then what do you do about it? And I think it's a very difficult moment when companies realize, especially companies that have limited budgets, to say, we can't be everywhere at once. We just can't do this the right way. So to me, I don't like to tell people what to do. I try and ask enough questions so that they kind of come to this awareness on their own. But most of the time it's like, either I can't afford any of this, or we've got to start in let's just pick one country, one market, and start from there. Maybe that's a place like Singapore, but Singapore is an interesting one because Singapore is a little city-state. The country is the size, I think, of the Boston's 128 belt. That's the country.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So if you think about the traditional way, or at least the way I would have been used to it coming up out of the US, was pilot it in a city. If it works, then we roll it out to region or to the whole country. Well, you can pilot something in Singapore, but then if you take it into Indonesia, which you can see from Singapore, totally different market. So a lot of the lessons learned might not work at all. Uber is any of these delivery companies, any of those things are a perfect example, because the infrastructure in Singapore, the maps work, the traffic is good and reasonable. The costs are high, but everything works. You take a 40-minute boat ride over to Indonesia, and you can throw all of those statements out the window. Nothing works. The traffic's insane. The space is massive. So it's like nothing that you would be able to do logistically would transfer. So it's actually, I don't mean to be so negative, but it's really difficult to pick one and then think that becomes your
model.
Replicate it. Yeah, it's like the model. It's a constant adaptation over here.
That is a good thing for companies to keep in mind, actually. And so given that, can you set up a process? Like, what are the steps that a company would want to take, and then that they can replicate from country to country? Right.
So I think the first step is get a lot of money. Because it costs more money than I've never seen a company come up with a plan, execute it on time and on budget based on what they thought. And most of the companies said, well, we took our plan, we built a plan, and then we just doubled everything to be safe. And then that is usually where the troubles, that even that causes issues. So and I'll tell you another component here, which I see a lot of Western companies making this mistake, or this realization, is that the competition in so many of these markets is so much stronger than what people were expecting. 10 years ago, 15 years, 20 years ago, a Western established company could essentially come over to an emerging market, plant a flag, and look, there was challenges, no question, but there was generally an acceptance. There was almost like a regional brand awareness that, okay, if this company has made it into a market as tough as the US, surely they'll do fine over here. And there was sort of a quality component to it. Like there was some just general, these companies could get away with stuff. That's not the case anymore. The local competition has grown and evolved, and local consumers, end users, if you're talking B2B or B2C, I think are more sophisticated in terms of what they're more demanding than ever before. So the Western brand power has diminished considerably, whereas local competitor skills and quality has gone up considerably. And that's been a massive, painful awareness happening for companies as they expand.
Can you give us one example of creative kind of mismatch in terms of when someone's thinking that something's going to be good in the United States and then kind of translating that over to another culture?
I had this company call me years ago who was in, they built software for Fortune 500s or for large enterprise accounts, and it was designed to help employees with their health. So it was like a lifestyle guidance system. It would give advice based on their lifestyle in terms of some, change of diet, change of just all sorts of things, even from, how you sit at work, your desk, everything. What they did was they did their market research, but what they looked at was health statistics. Okay. And one of the more unhealthy populations in the world, in some degrees, is China. And China is the biggest or second biggest in population in the world. So 1.3 billion people or so, and relatively unhealthy based on the metrics that they were looking at. So that was like point A and point B for them, and they saw dollar signs. The problem was that everything about their system, their actual product, didn't work in the market. The advice that it would give to us in good old Boston was, you've got to walk more. So when you park your car, when you drive to work, park your car in the parking lot, park it farther away so you take more steps to get into the office. Well, that's helpful if you have a car, but a population that doesn't drive, that's kind of useless, right? Yep. If you want to lose weight and get rid of those carbs, don't eat so much bread. That's great. But what about a place that doesn't really eat bread as a major staple, right? So like the entire diet advice was different. If you're a 20-something and you're a bachelor, bachelorette living on your own, you're probably, I certainly did, was, eat my dinner over a sink, or I wasn't the healthiest, right? Yeah, and so the software would tell you not to do that. Well, in China, bachelors don't live on their own. Bachelorettes, that's not what happens in the entire social structure. So all of the advice was wrong, and so they had to make a decision. What do we do? Do we rebuild the entire software? And at the time, it was thankfully they kind of came across all of these aha moments before they planted a flag there.
Gone all in.
They would have lost millions. They would have lost millions of dollars. I'll give you one quick funny B2C one. So Barbie, this one's kind of a famous story, but I think it's Mattel. They put a 6-story toy store, Barbie store, in downtown Shanghai.
Okay.
That's a very expensive investment. Nobody went to it. Nobody cared. And it turned out that local consumers aren't going to buy their kids Barbie dolls, because everything that Barbie stands for traditionally goes against a lot of the principles of certainly modern day China, but just traditionally in China. We're not going to buy a doll. First of all, we don't want our kids playing with dolls. Okay. We want them doing their homework. And if we're going to buy a doll, we don't want someone dressed in, a mini skirt driving around a pink car. We want somebody we want to buy no joke, we want to buy a doll who's doing her homework. Right. No joke. So the entire thing failed. Wild. And what they've now done is they've kind of reinvented the entire thing. So now it's almost an education play. Okay. Because that's what parents there buy. Got to do your research.
They didn't just give up; they reinvented, and I think that's really an important lesson.
Yes. They had the money to.
That's
Yeah.
true.
But you're absolutely right. Like Starbucks, same way. Starbucks failed the first time, but they tried again and they adjusted. A lot of companies have come back for rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah.
They have figured it out.
Yeah.
They've adapted. But those are some expensive learnings. And
Yes, very costly learning.
Yeah.
I think it's important then to tell those stories so that people can start, thinking about what's worked and what's not. And hopefully it gives people ways of thinking about their own product or service to say, well, wait a minute, maybe this thing isn't a cut and paste play. Maybe I've got to rethink this a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's true on every level. You really need to think about, even in America, I know if a cafe is in one neighborhood really working well, you can move across town and it won't work because it's just not the same neighborhood.
Yes.
So these are really important lessons regardless of where you are and what you're trying to do, and then rethink it. Yeah,
it's one of the reasons companies go overseas is because it forces innovation. And it's innovation sometimes that you can actually bring back to your home country.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So you all of a sudden you figure out, oh, well, there was a story of, it was a big manufacturing company. They made some low price crisp or chip or something for India. And they were targeting villages in India at a super low price point. And they kind of just, for some reason, they tested it in Australia, and the Australia market loved it. And it turned into a huge seller in Australia and New Zealand. It was this nice unintended consequence of adjusting in one market to suit a local need, but then finding that it's actually applicable elsewhere.
Very good lesson.
Cool.
Yeah.
So how can people find you? This has been such great information, and we want people and companies, that are tuning in, that are considering expansion. How can people connect with you?
Well, as of this week, I can't leave my apartment, so I'm easy to find.
So you're easy to find by the next few weeks.
No.
As we all are in isolation.
As we are becoming all of these nomads, these digital nomads, there's 2 good ways to find me. So my website is actually called Leadership Nomad. So it's leadershipnomad.com. Okay. And there's information on the book there as well. So I send out a monthly newsletter, which I try not to spam people, but just some specific ideas about, global communication, global leadership ideas. And so that would be the first one. Really, the only social platform I use is LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter for fun, but LinkedIn is probably the more serious one. So you can find me there. And of course, the LinkedIn handle is Slapdragons. So that's kind of fun.
Love it.
Yes, and we'll also have your information below the video on YouTube.
Thank you.
So.
Yeah, the book doesn't come out until middle of June. So I'm in the process. I was going to be doing a lot of traveling and speaking. That's probably not happening.
For touring,
Yeah, so I'll be doing a lot more promotions and just to do special kind of workshops and live seminars for companies that are looking just even, as they're adjusting to remote work. There's some good ways to start building communication styles and to understand working styles, because the tension is going to increase, and under pressure, we all tend to fall back to our original working styles, which actually cause more tension than not. So
friction.
Friction. Yeah, friction's a good word. So I'm a cheap date these days because I'm doing it just for you can buy books instead of have to pay for the actual service. So it's a good time to check it out.
All right, fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the time that you've taken.
Thank you.
This morning for us, this evening for you.
Not a problem. Yeah, we're
exactly.
Yep. So no worries at all. I appreciate the invite.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode soon. And stay healthy, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.